So then, and sir also doesn't like much of an introduction. Sir is in a little bit of a hurry. So I will straight away pass it on to sir. This is what we come.
Uh, as usual, it's my fate to apologize in the beginning. But your Rajkot traffic is to good extent responsible if I'm more than late today. Again, I must say that it's my singular pleasure and privilege to be with all of you. And I would straight away begin with a few questions, and I'll try to respond, and maybe whatever time we have, we can have some space for questioning as well. Questions and answers. I think comparative literature demands a couple of questions, and these questions would have been asked by you and maybe would have been responded as well. Because higher education is unfortunately concerned with answers, but it should primarily be concerned with questioning the answers. And the question should be, why should I study comparative literature? And if I should study comparative literature, what is it? If we get an answer, then we should know how comparative literature as a category differs from other prevalent categories. Other question should be, how did it evolve as a discipline, if you say, or as a domain of study? And other question should be, where does it stand in 2010? If we get hold of these simple questions, questions as questions, then perhaps much of our problem is solved, because at least we are in control of questions at least. I always like that whatever we study, whatever we do, we should try to relate all questions and all answers to our experience, and manifestation of that experience in different forms. How did our own experience manifested itself in different forms? That is something that will make you different as a scholar. Whatever you know about the West, about others, no problem. I think it's worth knowing. But do relate it in terms of your own cumulative cultural experience. And look at your cultural experience in terms of other cultural experiences. And the moment you do this, then you become comparative. Because comparative literature primarily came in existence as a reaction against a category that had emerged sometime in the second half of the 18th century. I think 18th century is primarily known for, second half of 18th century is primarily known because of couple of things. And one is American independence. The same year Adam Smith's book was published, French Revolution, all these things we know. But if you look at, two things happened. One was that a new middle class emerged in Europe, and along with that, the feudal order had by this time almost eroded. In fact, Fairy Queen is celebration of erosion of feudal order. In fact, Spencer made a mistake. What was the mistake Spencer made? And the mistake that Milton did not make, Spencer made the mistake that despite having all poetic abilities, he chose a wrong theme. He chose a theme that was about decadent institution of knighthood. And what Milton did, Milton wrote about a theme after working almost, some people say 100 drafts and some people say 32 drafts, which theme I should choose. And then he said that I must write on a theme that would be of eternal interest. So fall of our first ancestors, Adam and Eve, all of us would be interested in our, So he chose that. So Spencer's Fairy Queen is about knighthood, feudal order. This feudal order collapsed in Europe, and then what happened? A new entity came in existence, and this entity was nation. And nation in Europe was built not against your notion of Rashtra. It was built around one nation, one geographical entity, that is land, region, one language, one literature, one religion, one region. So, nation equal to one region, equal to one religion, equal to one language, equal to one literature. Fine. So England came in existence, so English literature came in existence. Germany came in existence, so German literature. France, French literature. Is it clear? Now, when this happened, then would you ever consider your literature to be inferior to any other? You will never. Charles Refeter says that what world would think tomorrow, Europe thinks today. And what Europe will think tomorrow, France thinks today. Now, if you look at then, if my literature is the best literature, if French literature is the best literature, if German literature is the best literature, then why should I waste my time in studying other literatures? Right or wrong? When your literature is the best, then you read your literature, no need to read any other literature. So that is how this concept of national literature came in existence. And this concept of national literature, what did it do? It alienated one literature from other. Function of literature is to delineate society. One of the literature mirrors society, all of us repeat so often. Function of literature is, one of the main functions is to delineate society. What was literature doing? What was national literature doing? It was alienating one society from other. So basic function of literature was getting frustrated. Therefore, some people who had by this time got exposed to the other literatures, people like Goethe in Germany, they responded and they brought in something like, a new concept. And that new concept was world literature. World literature came in existence. Now, world literature can simply be understood as literature as the world classics. In some universities, world classics paper was taught. World classics means you put all classics of the world in one place and you study them. So like, if you took epic, so this is Homer's Iliad, this is Divine Comedy, this is Paradise Lost, then this is Ramayana, this is Mahabharata. So you put all of them together, and then you study them. Comparison, if it happens, that's a different matter. What should be the methodology? The people who taught world classics, they never knew the methodology of studying epics. They were never bothered. So world classics, world literature came in existence. These days, if you remember, some of you who were in the in our international conference, David Demerosh, his concept is Americans are trying to poke their nose into world literature. So they are bringing world literature, but for you that's not important at the moment. I think I should not confuse you with that. But that politics of literature you can discuss later on. The point that was there is that, so national literature, against national literature, what came in existence? World literature. Your Abhigyan Shakuntalam, he read, Goethe read, and most of you would know it is said that he danced after reading Abhigyan Shakuntalam. So what was happening? Two different worlds, European world and the new world that they had not seen, world of nature, which was fossilized and exoticized also. So no problem with that. So these two worlds came together. So he was one. Here what happens is that the notion of world also remained different. Because world literature to Goethe meant Europe, and plus Europe then this new literatures from the colonized worlds. In fact, if you look at in the 19th century when the colonization became a long elongated process in which, like by 1815 15% surface of the earth was colonized, and by the time you reach 1870s, then almost 65% surface of the earth was colonized. Indian literature, Sanskrit literature goes to Europe as one of the consequences of colonization. So when these new worlds came in existence, then the existing domains were disturbed. So what to do? So to study European literatures, the category was comparative literature, because to comparison can be amongst equals. So to compare German with French, comparative literature was thought of, not Abhigyan Shakuntalam. For primitive societies, anthropology was found out. That anthropology societies, primitive societies like African societies, for them comparative literature was not the category. What was the category? Anthropology was category. So what you see then in this last quarter of the 18th century to 19th century, there's a lot of upheaval in the domains of knowledge. So world literature, from the world literature, by this first decade of the 19th century, a new concept comes in existence. And the new concept is the concept of comparative literature. And this comparative literature comes in existence when the manuals were prepared in Germany and France. Manual is like, not manual in our sense, but manual is almost like syllabus, what should be taught. So should we teach German literature also along with that? Should we teach Sanskrit literature also along with that? So during the process of preparing these manuals, it was thought that we should bring all these diverse literatures together. During this period, another category came in existence, general literature. The general literature was also, all literatures were studied in a different way. Now, there is a basic allegation. When you would look at the distinction that I am making, at one point this distinction gets blurred. Like what they would say is that if you study novel, evolution of novel, when you study novel, the progress of novel would fall in the category of general literature. Then novel, it starts from here. Like your Suvarnalata story. Max Muller, if you have read Suvarnalata story, starts from India, then it goes to Arab world, Iraq in particular. From Iraq it goes to Roman world, then Europe, and by the time it reaches Europe, it becomes, your Swarnalata becomes Cinderella. So when it comes to you, it becomes, what happens to you? You are very happy with Cinderella, you have forgotten your Swarnalata. Huh? Same is the case to texts like Nemade, Bhalchan Nemade. What he says is that, for instance, novel when we look at, what he says is that it is the return of the native. The narrative begins from first narratives. Where do we find earliest narratives? We find in Upanishads. So what happens that the narratives take form of novel and then they return. Anyway, this is a different story. So when you would look at, say for instance, English novel, German novel separately, it will become your national literature. When you would read novel, that will cut across how novel comes to India, say for instance, then it will fall in the category of general literature. Now, why does it not become comparative literature? That's a question that comparatives have not been able to answer. So most beautiful thing about comparative literature is quite a bit of haziness in the categories that is there. But these are the basic categories that we will have to think of. Now when comparative literature becomes distinct from others is in the sense it is based on the basic premise that there are no universal standards of judging the worth of a work of literature. There are no universal standards for judging the worth of a work of literature. Can there be any approach that this is the final approach by which you can judge? No. All approaches, all criteria are provisional. What is of lasting importance, not eternal. What is of lasting importance is that the best criterion to judge the worth of a work of literature is another work of literature. Isn't it? So, how to judge the worth of Mahabharata? When you take it close to Iliad. How to judge the worth of Ramayana? When you compare Ramayana with Mahabharata. So, through comparative study, one is we come to know the principles by which the worth means literary worth of a work of art is established. I think light does not come from above. Light moves horizontally also. The point is this, that work, another work of literature is maybe the best criterion to judge. But what comparative literature assumes is that it accepts the existence of the other. National literature did not accept the existence of the other. So other work also exists. Now not just because indifference is worse than death. That if you are indifferent to some literature, that means that literature is dead to you. Better you reject or kill someone, but do not be indifferent. So comparative literature is not indifferent. Comparative literature accepts the existence of the other. And not only this, it accepts that it is worth studying. And when do you do that? You do it when you believe in the principle that it is of equal standards. Means there are some good things in this, some good things in this. There are a few things lacking in this, a few things lacking in that. Is it clear? Therefore, what it assumes is that when two works, two literary traditions, when they are brought together, what do? They throw light at each other. The phrase that at least I am very fond of, it leads to mutual illumination. Mutual illumination. If because of mutual illumination, there would be no darkness under the. Only the bottom would hide darkness. It will hide darkness, mutual illumination. It's a comparative literature does this. But the thing is that this comparative literature does it. I said that people who taught world classics, they did not know methodology. People who taught general literature did not know methodology, though they must be practicing it, but they were not doing it consciously. What do I mean by consciously? The difference, say, for instance, is one is Kabir Das, one is Tulsi Das. Kabir Das says, "Mas kagaz chuyo nahi, kalam gahi nahi haath." He said that I did not touch either ink, paper, and I did not hold even pen. Tulsidas, while writing Ramcharitmanas, he says, "Kavit vivek ek nahi more." I do not have even an iota of poetic abilities. Now both of them are saying the same thing, but both of them are doing it with a different purpose. When Kabir Das says that I did not touch ink, paper, or did not hold pen, he is stating it as a fact. That I am not a poet. He is not. Kabir is not a conscious poet. When Tulsidas says that Kavit Vivek Ek Nahi More, and after that he writes a slok in Sanskrit. Because Ramcharitmanas has quite a few slokas in Sanskrit also. So what he is saying it out of poetic modesty. So Tulsidas is a conscious poet. Kabir is a poet without being conscious of what poetry or poetic ability is. So the people who taught world classics, they were not conscious comparatists. Why they were not conscious? They were not conscious because they did not know methodology of comparative literature. Fine? Now here let me make another statement. And the statement is, comparative literature is no literature. Keep in mind, comparative literature is no literature, because the Professor Lane Cooper, who was made the first head of the department in America, he said that I do not want to be the head of the department, because there is greater integrity perhaps in the West. In our country there is queue for this. They want to, whether I am convinced with this or not. So he said, I am not convinced. Because he said there can be nothing like comparative literature. If there can be comparative literature, then there should be something like comparative potato and comparative tomato also. At first page of SS Pror, you will find this mention. Now the thing is that there is nothing like comparative literature. Answer Pror gives is different. He said the answer is it should be comparative study of literature or comparative literary study. Fine, no problem. But he said that after, in the second page he says, for the sake of convenience I will be using comparative literature. But then when I say that there is nothing like comparative literature, we cannot skip the question like SS Pror or Lane Cooper did. Our answer is comparative literature is no literature. Comparative literature is a methodology of studying literature. Methodology of studying literature comparatively. Is it? I think this should be very much clear. So if anybody says, what is it? It is all about this. Now, if this is so it is a methodology of studying literature comparatively. That if I have forgotten, use this adverb also. Comparatively. For this you need at least two literatures. I think that's because without other this does not exist. To cut the story very short, between 1805 to 1955. How many years? 150 years. In 2-3 minutes we sum up. 2-3 school emerged. Schools emerged out of methodology and out of concerns. What were their basic preoccupations? One school emerged in Germany. And German School of Comparative Literature focused on one basic principle that you should get hold. In case you know already very well, but you get hold of this. German School of Comparative Literature focused on what in SS Pror you would find. It is not mentioned there. This you will realize after 10 years. It is not mentioned that it revolved around thematology. Thematology or thematics, study of theme. In Germany, Stoff or in Gestalt, these were important. So it revolved around theme. So they study, what did they focus on? They did not do anything else. They did so many things. But primarily what did they do? They got hold of one theme and how one theme is used in different literatures. Right? Like, your lost and found theme in Manmohan Desai and in Shakespeare. Is it there or not? Lost and found, very important theme. All these melas, Kumbh and all, I think they are held just because of this. Either for losing someone or for finding someone. Anyway, so in German school, what was important? Thematics was important. French school, what was important? In France, what was important was that positivism had become an important movement by the first quarter of the 19th century. And you would be surprised to know that social sciences also came in existence around that time. So French school saw everything in relation to cause and effect. Cause and effect. I am simplifying and generalizing. What is cause? That if I am speaking about comparative literature, that means I would have read certain books on comparative literature. So my reading is the cause, what I am speaking is the consequence. That is the effect. If I had not read, then it would not have been possible. Therefore, a poet also writes something because of certain social, psychological factors, economic factors, as well as the ambience to which the poet is exposed. Like, Marlowe became a member of atheist school, and therefore what does he do? Religion is a toy. Marriage is a ceremonial toy. Isn't it? Guy of Malta and Dr. Faustus. Why is he saying? So that he was member of atheist school, in which Raleigh was also there, and in which Jesus Christ and Moses, they were questioned and they were termed as fraudulent magicians. And that's why they were questioned. They were almost like questioning against them. Anyway, the poor men died so early. This was the cause and this was the effect. So therefore, if certain poets, certain writers write in certain way, it is because of this. This they put in the category of influence. Influence. That a writer writes under some kind of influence means whatever you have gathered from different sources. Is it clear? Like you were a member of the library, then you were reading this and then you did it. He was member of that school, surrealist school, and then they did like this. Fine. So this is influence. Later on, this influence was considered little negative term because in this certain category is privileged. Influencer is privileged. So therefore, what was later on done? Influence was replaced by reception. Therefore, you would find these two methods, influence and reception, not marriage receptions. That it is not influence. Influence, everything is in the air. But everything is in the air, then you receive something in your certain way. So what is important? Influence is not, so influencer is privileged rather than what is important? One who receives is important. Everything like the same person, all 50, 60 are here. We all of us read the same book. Influence is the same, reception is different. Right? So this is it. As far as the third school, major school of the 19th century was British school, which was the weakest incidentally. And for this credit goes to Matthew Arnold. And in Matthew Arnold, if you read the study of poetry, what is the study of poetry? I should not ask this question. The study of poetry is something like touchstone method. That you take I and O close to the touchstone, and then this also becomes. So what he was saying, Matthew Arnold was proposing that English poetry should come in contact with classical poetry, Greek, even French. Then this will become this. So then what was it? What emerged was the term called placing. Placing, P-L-A-C-I, place, place, placing, single comma, placing. Placing means when two literatures are placed together. When they are placed together, then what happens? Then it leads to what I refer to mutual illumination. So not only touchstone, but what comparative literature does it? No, not only touchstone, but beyond touchstone, it leads to mutual illumination. In touchstone, there is superiority of something. Touchstone is superior to something other, that is inferior. So inferior becomes superior, but superiority of something. In mutual illumination, what is there? There is difference. Differences. In mutual illumination, two are separate. They are brought together. Both of them throw light. This throws light on this, and this throws light on this. This is how it developed, and this is how the three important methodologies were developed. Later on, your movement, your periodization, movement, all these categories, all these trends developed. But ultimately, if you look at the comparative literature, is primarily about history of ideas. History of ideas which have no nationality. Ideas have no nationality. Only thing is, in literature, the ideas do not appear as ideas. Ideas appear in the garb of art. Ideas, the ideas are presented, the ideas are camouflaged. That's why Arnold at one point of time says that what is poetry? And I like this definition because I understand also. He says it is thought and art in one. Ode to Grecian, last two lines, whatever people say, they are not poetry. That is, what is it? That is philosophy, that is idea. But before that, the whole of it is poetry. And in that also there is some core of that poem. That's a different thing. But because in beauty is truth, beauty in this, art is not there. Idea is presented as idea. Fine. So then the point is that comparative literature is history of ideas. But what ideas? Literary ideas. Methodology of operation of these ideas, the way they appear in different literary discourses. Literary today means non-literary discourses. as well. After some time, we feel around 1955, when the post-colonial societies also came in existence, around 1955, a new dimension was given, because in the meantime, chairs of comparative literature were established in not so early in America and all, but in New Zealand, Auckland in particular. Around 1955, a new turn was given, and this turn was given by the person called American professor Remark, R-E-M-A-K, Henry Remark. And what did he say? He simply opened up the scope of comparative literature. And what was this opening? He said that literature to be studied comparatively should be preceded by another question, that literature is not something produced in isolation. The poets who write, writers who write, they live in a society and they are influenced by different factors, economic, social, political. Therefore, by doing it, the movement was towards new integration, that all these are not lopsided identities, but they're integrated. Therefore, by this time, by 1955, specialization was established, that this is music, this is philosophy, this is economics, this is psychology, this is this, and then there was no interaction amongst these disciplines. What did Remark propose? Remark proposed that comparative literature does not remain limited just to comparative literature, just to literature, but it should bring in other disciplines also in the fold of study. And what, like economics, political science, music, psychology, all of them. Like, if there is something like Oedipus complex, so if there is Oedipus complex in Western literature, then there should be Oedipus complex in Indian literature also. So for that, what would be needed? Oedipus complex in, you can take D.H. Lawrence's Sons and Lovers. You can take any work from Gujarati or Hindi or Bengali, Marathi, any such literatures are available. Even in the more complex the work, more complexes are there. All epics contain quite a few of them. So it is possible for us to look at comparative literature as a new area where literature is studied comparatively, but it moves almost towards integration of disciplines, almost towards interdisciplinarity, which was not by this time established as much as it did, I think, around 70s and 80s. This was again, within 4 years, René Vellec asked questions about methodology of comparative literature. He said that its categories are not clear and its methodology is also not clear. What you do in general literature, you tend to do in this. What you do in reception, you tend to do in other category. So difference between reception and influence, that is also not clear. And he was right to a good extent. So he talked about what we know as crisis of comparative literature. Now, after this 1959 address of René Vellec, what we find is that comparative literature lost. Comparative literature tried to do everything. So it tried to do interdisciplinarity, it tried to do integrated studies, it tried to do translation, because so many countries had become very free. So how to study them? How to compare Gujarati literature with German literature? Either you know both the languages, If you do not know, then German is to be translated in Gujarati or Gujarati work is to be translated to German. So what happens is that during this period, translation becomes important. Translation becomes central. So by 1991, Susan Bassnett, when she writes Introduction to Comparative Literature, what does she say? Comparative literature is dead, comma, in one sense. And what is that sense? Sense is traditional, conventional comparative literature is dead because it has been replaced by what? It has been replaced by translation studies. In between, cultural studies came in existence. Comparative literature tried to do that as well. Comparative literature tried to include oral, folk, even film studies in it. So when you look at the four major reports, Harry Levin, these are, this American Comparative Literature Association became very important. So they brought out four major reports. They decided that we will bring out one report of comparative literature in 10 years. If you, I think, our colleagues would remember, some of you would remember, I had two-pronged agenda in organizing international conference. Apart from whatever, like in our department, my basic idea was that Indian Comparative Literature Association, CLI, should also have its report, one report in a decade, once in 10 years. And I think in my address I had very categorically mentioned. And second thing I wanted was that literary historiography in different languages should be taken up as a study. And the office bearers of comparative literature saw to it that those two sentences of mine were not discussed all through. Because, and anyway, point is, I'm not that I'm sharing the futility of my dreams. We will see to it that this happens. But it is because it gives you the status report and what do we want to do. Because these academic politicians are worse than politicians. And those who want to be the presidents and general secretaries. It will happen this year, don't worry. The point is that they brought out one report in a decade. Harry Levin did one, Green did another. 60s and 70s. 80s there was disagreement. I had made a mistake. I had proposed that Harish Trivedi will be the chief coordinator of writing the report. And maybe this Chandramohan or people from Bengal did not like that. Because, it goes as some of the people. Anyway, I'm sorry to share this. Well, I thought that he is the best person to do it. So in 80s what happened? There was this problem. So there was disagreement in the working group and then they did not submit the report. Charles Bernheimer submitted report in 1994. I think all of you should go through that later on after doing your MA. That is comparative literature in an age of multiculturalism. And thereafter, in 2006, Hans Saucy wrote the report. Comparative, I'm mentioning the title because titles are important. Now, Bernheimer's report is comparative literature in an age of multiculturalism. Multiculturalism was a problem before so many cultures had come into existence. How to deal with them? To study them comparatively, can it be one of the ways? That was one. But within 10 years, if you see that the world changed. And what happened? From multiculturalism, world moves towards uniculture. That is, globalization was trying to kill so many cultures. So the problem that Hans Saucy, H-A-U-N-S-A-U-S-S-E-Y, what Hans Saucy does is that it deals with comparative literature in the age of globalization. And they discuss comparative literature in films, comparative literature and oral literature, comparative literature and terrorism. You know, even this, these things. So the point I wanted to make was that comparative literature lost its identity because it tried to do everything. And despite all this, if this world that has so many literatures has to understand each other, because maybe some literatures might die, some languages might die, but ultimately some would survive. And it is also possible that people thought that with technology so many literatures would die with ICT. It did not happen. ICT, like, you know, your Star Plus came, Star Plus English, now Star Plus is available in Hindi also. They gave up English. They cannot come in Gujarati because, you know, I was sharing this report with one person who works with them. They said that they cannot match Star Plus Gujarati they wanted to launch, but when they did their study, they said that they cannot do it because they cannot challenge this ETV Gujarati and GTV Gujarati. You know? Or there is a Channel 9 Gujarati. You know? Yeah. And V Gujarati is coming in another 2 months. Anyway, so the point is this, that we thought that this will kill so many, but that is also, so literatures would survive. So to understand, we need to have methodology, and that methodology is needed because we are in academics. Whatever be the demerits of methodology, without methodology, nobody is going to listen to you. Nobody is going to pay attention to you. Therefore, comparative literature takes you out of your romantic study of literature or romantic modes of studying literature. It tells you about methodology. This is how we do it. This is I share with this is how I read it, and then in the process, it questions the methodology, thereby exposes the weaknesses of the methodology as well. Last point with which I would like to sum up is pertaining to new development, and I think which is something very good that remained unnoticed in our country to good extent. Around 1920s, this literariness had come in picture. If it is literature, literature has to cope up with the question of literariness that you find in Viktor Skolovsky, Russian formalism. What is literary in literature? Literariness of literature that you find in Vakrokti also. This literariness was referred in some way by Roman Jakobson also. We have forgotten him for this. Roman Jakobson, the way he mentions. This study of Roman Jakobson inspired another Slavic scholar, Dion Durusin, Durirusin, and he in 1979 wrote a book on interliterary process. Now, this is a major shift. I'm just mentioning two words. You can fly thereof. There are platforms for you to fly. That is, interliterariness is important, but more important than literariness, or equally important as literariness, is interliterariness. That is, the way literariness of a literature is related to another literature. For instance, Tagore, because this is Tagore's, everybody is would be celebrating. Tagore's study is getting a kind of new attention. Now, if you look at Chayabad in Hindi, Romanticism in Bengali literature, then Tagore studied romantic poetry, romantic poets, but he receives it in the light of his own tradition. Now, he writes, and when a poet from Hindi, Nirala, Suryakant Tripathi Nirala, I think a very important poet, he was born and brought up in Bengal, Mahishadal region. He was born and brought up there. He wrote the entire volume, Ravindra Kavita Kanan. So what happens? That Romanticism from first quarter of the 18th century, after 100 years, is received by Tagore in his own way. It is not swallowed by him. He takes whatever is important, whatever is not important, he takes it away. That is received by whom?